Good evening for everyone who is with us. My name is Julia Driscoll. I'm the Alumni Relations Manager here at St. Andrews, and I'm so thrilled to have these four alums here tonight speaking with us on this new career panel event that we are launching. So I'm so grateful for y'all, and I am going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves to you.
Hi, I'm Michael Weiner, class of 2003. I am a mortgage broker and a certified mortgage advisor with Hometown Texas Lending.
Hey y'all, I'm Madison Dial Anderson. I was St. Andrews class of 2005 and am now an associate partner with Bain & Company in consulting, and I live in Dallas.
Hey everyone, I'm Jace Berner. I graduated with the class of 2009. I'm currently with the Austin office for Latham & Watkins as an associate attorney.
Hey everybody, I'm Allie Zoden. I was class of 2011 and I am a senior accountant with the Yeti.
Awesome, thanks y'all so much. Let's just get right down to it. So this first question is for Jace. Jace, how did you know that your current employer and current position was right for you?
That's a really good question. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was really young, and I've been at several different law firms, but I think I really knew that Latham was the spot for me when I was in the interview process. Actually, all of my interviews ran long, and it was really, instead of a true job interview, is more just like conversations with friends. And those are conversations that I've continued to have with these people ever since I've joined. And it was just kind of a feeling I got as soon as I was talking to these people that these are the people I want to be in the trenches with, working late at night with. So it was a pretty easy sell for me from there.
Madison, how about you?
It's different than Jace in the fact that I did not know what a consultant was growing up, for sure. I didn't even know what a consultant was when I was like a junior in college. So I discovered the field later as a senior. And once I did, I was excited about just the capacity for learning. And the firm for me, this is where I would say similar to Jace, and that it was kind of all about like relationships and the people. I just found that when I met people from my firm, I just looked at them and I was kind of like, I want to grow up to be like them. It just was like, yeah, that, like, I want to talk like them. I want to have the experiences that they've had, like that. It was more instinctual than anything else, and very based on the people.
On the contrary, Micah, do you want to talk about a time when you discovered that a job was not the right fit for you?
Sure. Yeah, sometimes discovering, sometimes you can learn pretty quickly if something isn't the right thing. And then sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I've had both experiences. The only advice that I could give is just to trust your gut. Anybody who's listening to this call or watching this has a pretty good feel for who they are and what they can do. And sometimes you just kind of get a gut feeling. People I've seen a lot of discussions. How long do I stay in a job I don't like? How long do I stay in something that doesn't work? That's not a feeling that you want to have. That's not nobody wants to be in a job. Oh, I need to stay here for a year because it looks good on my resume, or whatever that may be. And so it is really important. It's one thing that I wish I would have done better. There have been times where I've gone into the wrong thing because, oh, I need it, this is good, and talk yourself into it. But it's important to set the expectations with yourself. And that's the best advice I can give.
Allie, do you have experience with this as well?
Yeah, so it's funny, Micah mentioned like staying at a job for a certain amount of time to feel like you owe them that, or whether or not you think that people will judge you for leaving after a certain amount of time. When I moved back to Austin, I had interviewed with a job and it seemed like a great fit, but I soon realized that it had been a little while since I had interviewed, and also interviewed a company and interviewed someone that I was working with. And about 6 weeks in, I realized this is not, this is not necessarily a great fit for me and what I'm looking for in a job. And I, had a lot of internal debate about it, was looking at my expenses. I just signed a lease in Austin, and I was like, all right, I know I have to be making X amount of dollars. And it turned out that the current job that I have, Yeti, posted about 2.5 months after I had started the current job, the job that I was in at the time. And I was still so torn. I was thinking, should I even apply for this job? I just switched. And I think when you're in a job that's tough, you have to look at, are you at least learning things? Are you able to grow in this company, even if you're being exceptionally challenged? And then you need to look at, is there another opportunity out there that I can maybe switch to that would also make me happier? And I talked to a lot of people that I respected about it, because it was not something that I took lightly. And in my case specifically, Yeti was one of those companies that is, in a lot of people's cases, like a dream company scenario. And so I was able to apply for this job, not necessarily saying, hey, I am miserable in my current role and I'd like to make a change, but I was able to reframe that and say, I'm learning a lot in my current role, and this is a job that I can't not apply for, because not only does my experience fall perfectly in what you are asking for, but this is a company that I've followed for years, have respected for years, and also knew that would eventually be something that I was interested in. And so I think also following Micah, I knew pretty early on that the job that I left wasn't probably going to be a long term. And so trust your gut, know that you can leave, and you can also go back to a job that you left. While I didn't go back to the job that I left, while I was at that previous company, numerous people left, came back. And I know we're going to touch on not burning bridges, but I think as long as you leave a job respectfully and give them the time that they need to fill a position, if you leave and you enjoyed the job that you left, you can always go back to it. I was lucky enough that I found this other role, but I think had I been at my other job a little bit longer, I probably would have been reaching out to my VP of accounting saying, how about a hybrid Austin-Houston combo? Because it really was just not necessarily a great fit for me.
Wonderful. Well, at a certain point, one might choose to change careers. And this question came directly from an alum who wanted to know, what is the most common misconception about changing careers in your 20s and 30s? I think, Micah, this one's on you.
Sure. This is something I can speak to. The misconception is that people would be, look down on you or judge you in any way. It's just not the case. The biggest hurdle when changing careers a little bit later is being clear with yourself as to what you're doing and understanding the expectations that you have for yourself and how they align with the situation you're in. I know we're going to talk about COVID and how that's changed the world. I was in a position where the company I worked for shut down and didn't exist by the third week in March in 2020. So, it took a lot of reflection. The one thing I would tell people is to really, especially before making a career change, not just a job change, to really think through if that's the place that you want to be, because don't do that in haste. And as long as you're doing it with the proper amount of understanding what you're doing, I think that it's certainly something worth doing if you find yourself in the right spot.
All right. Our next question is, how did the pandemic change your career path? So thanks for segueing us into that. Allie, I think this one kicks to you. And if anyone else wants to chime in, just go right ahead.
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit, I was in Houston working in financial reporting for an oil and gas company. And I remember we had actually, funny enough, we had to do safety moments before each meeting. And in January, my safety moment was like, hey, there's this virus that's been found in China, but the CDC is saying, don't worry about it. It'll all blow over. Obviously not the case. But I remember the week before our office shut down, one of the supervisors was asking, hey, have we thought about how we're going to execute some of these things that we typically print out? And it's very hands-on tie out type situation for like if we can't come into the office. And I remember my coworker and I were like, oh, Megan, you're such a worry where this won't happen. And then the office shut down, and living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a dog, I said, hey, can I go work remotely from Austin for a couple weeks? You know, we'll be back shortly. A couple weeks turned into a couple months, turned into closer to 10 months. And as I was in Austin working remotely, I realized, you know, I wanted to be home. I also realized that accounting doesn't need to be done in person. You can very easily do your job remote. Now, granted, I was a few years into my career at the time when everything shut down. You know, I'd been at my company for a year and a half, was very comfortable with what I was doing. But from the pandemic, I realized I really appreciate and value being able to have a flexible work schedule. And as you know, the pandemic changed the work environment, I realized, you know, hey, I think Austin, I'd like for it to be my home base. And then from there, it was, okay, how often do I want to be in the office, if at all? And I'm lucky enough to have found a job that we have a hybrid. So actually today I was in the office. Next week I'll be in on Tuesday, but we only, as an accounting team, go in once a week from honestly more of a team building perspective than like a getting work done perspective, because they know we can all do our jobs remotely. But I think it was a really interesting shakeup in the corporate world, because so many jobs realized you don't have to be in the office to get your job done. And there is something to be said about being, you know, right out of college and having that experience of being able to flag down your supervisor if you need to talk to them. But at the same time, there is also something to be said about being, you know, very comfortable in your career and being able to say, I'm going to work from home. I'm going to be able to have my dog hanging out next to me, and I'm going to be able to work out during lunch and appreciate these things that, like, were 5 years ago were not even considered an option. And so I personally, as an accountant, really appreciate the shift, because it has afforded me so much more freedom than I would have had, you know, pre-pandemic.
Thank you for that. This next question goes to Madison and Jace. Madison, start with you. Let's talk a little bit about advanced degrees. Yes or no?
I work in an industry where many people have an advanced degree. I would say most of my colleagues at my tenure have an MBA, and that's outstanding. And I think that it can provide such an opportunity for building your network, for a kind of some concentrated time to think about what you want to do. And also, to what Micah talked about earlier, it can be very helpful for a career pivot. I myself did not go get an MBA. I did spend a couple years doing what I now think of as like my alternative MBA, where I was working for Bain, left, worked for a startup, and then came back. And so I am a huge proponent of kind of opening your eyes through different experiences, whether it's, school or even like sabbaticals, or like finding ways to like go and explore. And school can be a very productive way to do that. But overall, my view, we use this terminology of like one-way doors, two-way doors. Advanced degree, especially something like an MBA, it is for sure like it just opens more doors. It's very much a two-way door. You can do lots of different things. Some advanced degrees are going to be more one-way door. It's a specialization, and so you're kind of committing to something in a certain capacity. And so I think it's a very personal decision about whether you pursue an advanced degree, and there are career implications. There are also often personal implications, and I don't think those should be diminished also. I think it's important to think about things like partner and where you want to like geographically be. Like those should play into some of your career decisions also. And given all of that, you may decide, yes, let's do it. Let's do an advanced degree, but make it like a very personal decision, and have some foresight of how you're using it. Are you using it as like a clear door to something specific, or are you using it as more of this like two-way revolving door to something different and more expansive?
I hate that I have to follow that because Madison really just kind of knocked it out of the park. My situation is obviously a little unique since my advanced degree is required for me to do what I do. But a JD is kind of, it's like an MBA, in that I don't know many people who have a JD who aren't glad they have it, because there's so much you can do with it beyond being a lawyer. And I think when you start to think about advanced degrees, she's really right. Like you need to think about what you want to do with it. If you're just doing it because you don't know what you want to do out of school, I don't recommend that. I don't know many people who did that, spent the money, took that time, and they're really happy about it. There's occasionally people who find something that they're really passionate about. But I think especially when it comes to planning your career and your trajectory in life, it's something you want to be very purposeful and thoughtful about. It's not something you want to kind of just be like, I'm not sure what else I want to do, because there are implications. You're giving up your time, you're giving up money, etc. So if you're thinking about it, just say you want to really step back and think about what you want to do with it, and kind of how it's going to fit into whether you want to explore or you want to go specifically into like a specific industry. Definitely something I would tell people to keep in mind.
Jason, I'm going to stay on you for a minute because I wanted you to talk a little bit about what professional organizations you're a part of.
Sure. I'm involved in a variety of professional organizations. Obviously, I'm a member of the state bar and the American bar. But I think outside of kind of your traditional professional organizations, the people I've found that are most successful find other things that are usually a bit more sub-genre focused. People who get involved with like something that's tied to energy or startups or things like that. That's where I think people start to get the most value out of that. And I think true professional organizations aren't necessarily quite as helpful for that, because you're going to be meeting a lot of the same people that you already know who are doing the same kind of thing. And I think getting out and meeting other people, that's where you start to, be able to make connections. You can make introductions that help other people. They'll make introductions that help you. And I think one of the most underappreciated ways to do that is also getting involved in charitable organizations. I'm involved in several in Austin, been on the board of a couple, and that's been probably the most beneficial thing for me professionally, just because and I got this advice from a family friend when I moved back. Like when you serve with somebody in that kind of capacity, they get to know you at a whole different level. And it's something that people really come to value. And it's never a bad thing for someone to see you giving back and being involved and active in those types of things. So definitely would not, I guess, I would definitely encourage people to get involved at that level as well. I think that's the best thing you can do. And as St. Andrews grads, like you already know how to give back and serve. So it's not like you're having to relearn a skill or anything. It's something we've all been doing for a long time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Madison, who has been a helpful mentor to you and how did you meet them?
I am, I feel extraordinarily lucky in this regard. First, I have worked for a long time now for a firm that puts a huge premium and emphasis on mentorship. And I worked, I have a number of mentors, but there is one person who, like, I think of second only to my now husband, in terms of like influence on my career and trajectory. It's a woman I worked with, and I'll be honest, the first time I met her, I was kind of terrified of her. She was kind of scary. And so I reported to her and got to know her. And I think what's key is she knows me so exceptionally well, that she knows my potential and will like push me to my potential. She also knows my limits, and will call me on like, you're biting off too much, or like, you seem slightly overwhelmed. Like, what can we do to like back that off? And so for me, just it's been one of the most important aspects of my career to have somebody in my corner who knows me that well. And that I feel lucky, but I also think that it's just, if you approach your career with with humility and openness to find those people of who you will learn from, and then what's key is to bring vulnerability to your job, because she knows me that well because I let her know me that well. And so if you can be like, vulnerability in the workplace, like sometimes feels uncomfortable. And if it does, like, you're kind of doing it right. But if you are vulnerable in the workspace, then people can get to know you, and they'll know your potential, and they'll know your limits, and they'll help you navigate when things get hard, and they'll help you succeed when you're set up for the right success. So I think that's the lesson to take from kind of my story, is like vulnerability, openness, and find those people and just like lock onto them. Because everybody loves to play that role also. I love to be a champion for people now. And so don't feel greedy in asking for that type of mentorship, because your mentors will also get a lot out of it themselves.
Micah, how have you felt that networking has gone now that you have been a little bit more remote with the pandemic and everything? What ways do you find to network?
Sure. One thing I know I've learned throughout the process of COVID is I'm an extrovert. I like being around people. And so, Zoom meetings are great, and it's nice to talk to people. It's different than when you're in person with somebody. And it's just kind of funny. I essentially I work in real estate with a lot of real estate professionals. And before the pandemic, everybody spent, 2 or 3 days a week at happy hours or at coffees. And it's kind of awkward, and nobody really likes it. Anybody who tells you that they love going to networking events is probably a liar. But then when they started kind of coming back in March and April of this year, like it was sort of exhilarating in a way. And so you got to find a way to embrace those networking moments and being around people. And so, I think we've all learned a lot about ourselves throughout being cooped up and learning and adapting and operating differently. But that was something I found to be really interesting and impactful in what I do, is that, being out there and shaking hands, actually, it really does kind of get me going in a way that I wouldn't otherwise.
For the record, that was Micah in high school too. And I think Micah started networking in high school.
I still have that. Yes, I'm around.
Got an early start. All right, Allie, this next one is for you. So how have you handled networking and growing your career without burning bridges when moving jobs?
Yeah, I think that everybody understands that there is a certain amount of growth that is available in each role. I started my career in public accounting, very quickly realized it was probably not going to be a full-time forever career for me. And when I left, I made sure to give ample, saying, hey, I'm leaving. I'm going to be leaving in a couple of weeks. Make sure all of my projects are handed off appropriately. And Big Four, they're used to that turnover. But I think that the job that was probably the hardest for me to leave was the job right after that. And I think that everybody understands that when you find a role that really excites you and it seems like an improvement, whether it's job title, experience, different industry, because for example, I was leaving oil and gas, which I even remember in my interview, they said, why oil and gas? And I remember thinking in my head, because I live in Houston, Texas. I mean, why else would I be looking at oil and gas? Like I don't care about this industry, but I need a job. It was one of those things. And so when I was leaving and I found an industry that was exciting to me and was getting all of this experience, I think everybody was really excited for me. I was also in a unique position where my company had just gone through a bankruptcy. I had been performing at a certain level, was due for a promotion, and was told point blank that they weren't sure that the board would approve a promotion just because of where we were at as a company. And so they knew that I probably was going to start looking. They knew I was really happy in Austin and wasn't really looking forward to coming back to the office full time. And I set up meetings with my direct supervisor, my director, and my VP of accounting to say, this is what's happening. This is why I'm leaving. And I think that they all really appreciated that. I had wonderful conversations with all of them. My director wished me a happy birthday this weekend. I mean, we still have very wonderful relationships. And I know that if I saw a job at one of these companies that they're at now that sounded interesting, I could reach out to them and they'd be interested, and I actually use them as references for my Yeti job. So I think that as long as you act from a sense of respect and say, I'm going to do as much as I can do to help this transition be as smooth as possible, because at the time I was working in financial reporting and I intentionally was intending to leave after we filed our 10K, because as I said to the job that I accepted the role with, I said, the 10K is our Super Bowl. I can't leave before that's done. Unfortunately, the snowstorm of 2021 did impact that a little bit and did end up causing our filing to be delayed. And so I did have to leave before that happened, outside of my control. But they understood and they were like, you've committed to starting a March 1 start date. We can't hold you back from that. But I think that you can work with your team and leave respectfully and leave in a way that doesn't leave a bad taste in their mouth. I think you should always think, heaven forbid, if I need to come back to this job, would I still want to work with these people if I left? And thankfully, I have had an experience. I mean, there was even a brief time after I left my oil and gas job and was in the job that didn't necessarily fit, that I thought, would PwC be the right, which is where I worked pre-oil and gas. I was like, could that be a great option to go back to? But I also knew that because of the way I left, if I reached out to them again, they would be open to it. So I just think always leave with a sense of respect and trying not to leave them in a lurch, because these are your coworkers. This is the projects that you're working on. Have a sense of ownership there. I think that it's really important to say, hey, I know these are the projects that I'm working on, and if I can't finish them, which happens, you say, this is what needs to be done, and I will help transition that.
And I could follow up on that. Ali said a lot of things that were really great there. And the two biggest things in my mind when you talk about leaving a company or, whatever that may be, is transparency and relationships. And Ali spoke to how important it is to make sure that everybody understands what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because you do owe them, well, generally speaking, unless things are terrible, you generally owe people an explanation, at least. That's the least you can do. Often folks want to work with you. And to the relationship point, it doesn't matter if you're in sales, if you're an attorney, if you're, an accountant, whatever you do, the relationships you have with the people you work with and the people within your industry and outside your industry are really what matter. And, I'm sure we've all been in a position where somebody left on acrimonious terms. They might not have got along with management, but they got along with everyone they worked with. And then down the line, that management may not be there forever. And that person may come back because they were liked and respected and transparent. So, making sure that it goes with being a decent person, but explaining why you're doing what you're doing, and making sure that you keep that relationship the way you want it to be is worth doing.
Fantastic. On that note, if you are looking for a new opportunity, Jason, Madison, I think this is a great one for y'all. How should one best prepare for applying and interviewing with a new company?
You want to go first, Jace?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you first. In my experience, I think the best way is talking to people at the company outside of kind of the formal interview process. I know whenever I've switched and I've made several moves to different law firms, I always talk to people outside of the interview, because I think that's the best way to get a feel for the place, the role, the people. Because usually when you're in an interview, you kind of in your mode of I'm going to pitch myself, and if you're just talking to them, it's more on them to pitch the company and why you should come and join them. And I think that's a key thing, because you want to know why they want you there and why those people are there. So I would say if you have a connection at the place, or if you know of somebody who knows of somebody at the place, reach out, try and have that conversation. Even if you don't, take a shot, hit somebody up on LinkedIn, just see what happens. You never know. People like to talk about themselves generally, I've found. So if you sound like you're interested in what they do, they're likely going to give you, 15 minutes if you buy them a cup of coffee or something like that. So yeah, I would definitely, my big thing is always just go and talk to people at the company. You can do all the research you want online about the actual company itself, but it's the people that will make the organization tick. So that's where you want to go get your information.
I'll do a yes and to Jace, because I think that's all spot on in the exploration. I think when you're preparing for interview, I have two messages for you. I have interviewed, I lead Bain Dallas recruiting out of undergrad. So I've probably interviewed, I think it's like nearing 300 students. And so my advice is always two things. One is fundamentals. Understand how they're going to interview. And that is very different industry by industry. There are some very specific approaches that some industries will take, like mine being one. We do a case interview. And so understand that and prepare, like get the fundamentals right. The second is personalize it and give a real reason for why you, not just like, well, I'm passionate about this or strength in this. Make it personal. And the way that you do that I've seen most effective is do enough research, like what Jay said, to understand like the DNA of the company. And then you're like, okay, how do I prove I have that same DNA? And that can be anything. So like for me, like the DNA of my company is solving problems. I credit the fact that like I got a job at Bain, which by the way, like, I mean, if I applied now, like I would never get a job at Bain. Like my GPA would like, no, I would not. But I credit the fact that I got a job at Bain because in the interview, I talked about like, I'm really good at problem solving. And I can prove that because let me tell you about how I approach art history tests. So literally like, thank you, Miss Russell, for getting me a job in consulting. Like you never, and so it was memorable, it was personal, it was like specific to the company. And so like that takes some work, research, reflection, a bit of planning, but figure out that personal story of what is the company DNA, how do I personalize that in a way that's memorable. Don't forget the fundamentals. Know how they're going to interview so that you show up properly prepared.
So I have one other thing I would add as I was kind of thinking back on this, and I know this kind of gets back to the resume question I think we have at the end. Know all the stuff you have on your resume. I've done a lot of interviews with laterals and law students and whatnot, and it's amazing how many times I've gotten in an interview with somebody and asked them something about something on their resume, and they're just kind of like, I don't know how to speak intelligently about that. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a former job, something you have listed in your hobbies and interests. You need to know that, and you need to be willing to talk about it, because otherwise it's just, yeah, it's not a good look.
And Julia, while they were both talking, I was like, oh, I feel like they're both saying such great things that I want to add on to. Jace mentioned reaching out to someone on LinkedIn. The number of people that have reached out to me about talking about Yeti on LinkedIn specifically, I'm happy to hop on a call and talk to different people about how I got my role. I also think like Madison is specifically talking about case studies. Like with accounting, we're not necessarily saying, hey, prove to us that you can do accounting. We're going to go ahead and assume that you understand the fundamentals of accounting. But I think knowing what your different approaches to an industry is really valuable. Madison mentioned like, hey, let me talk about my art history background. As an ex-musical theater person, the fact that I'm in accounting is very unique. And so to be able to touch on, hey, am I your best accountant? Maybe, maybe not. But I can also talk about accounting in a way that you're going to understand it and make it slightly more engaging than someone who just is truly your like nose to the books type of person. And then the other thing that I think is really valuable, and it's something that I tell anybody that asks me about like the interview process specifically at Yeti, but I think this applies to everywhere, is research the company you're interviewing with. Do they have core values? And if so, look through them and try and think of examples that you have in your career that would apply to those core values. I led an interview recently where I had one of the core values as like the overarching tone of the interview. And so every interview was, or every question that I was given to ask was related to a sense of urgency. And if you're already familiar with those and you can pull out those stories, and I think that the more you interview, the more you have those examples that can kind of be tailored and manipulated to answer most questions. But if you already know ahead of time, realistically, they're going to ask me something about this. You can prepare and wow them. And it's like, it's really not that hard if it's a company that you really want to work at.
Thank you for adding that. That's great. Here's the next question. Madison, I'll kick this to you. Should you apply for a job if you don't have all of the experience listed in the job description?
Yes, you should. Absolutely. You should apply. And also recognize that, like I once looked at a job description, and I thought this was one of the most brilliantly written job descriptions. It listed all of the experiences and like responsibilities, and then at the end it said, like, if you don't feel like you have all of the qualifications, please reach out. And in fact, we know that if you feel that and you're like hesitant, there's a decent chance that you may be female or from a more diverse background. And we want to hear from you. And that is exceptionally true. And I've seen it in a lot of applications. No offense, Jace, Micah. But there is a real self-directive bias that can happen sometimes, where certain people of all sorts of backgrounds may feel like they are not qualified, and maybe may hold themselves back. Know that lots of people are applying to the job who do not meet all of the qualifications. And so you should just go ahead and do it yourself.
Does anyone have anything to add to that? Allie, you got something?
Yeah, I do. I also think that if there's something that you've never done before, but aren't familiar with, I'm going to again speak to what I know accounting wise. When I was first leaving public accounting, I had never worked in an ERP system, which is like how we book our journal entries and do our job. I had tested all of that stuff, but never actually executed it. And, I was able to say, hey, I have this experience that's sort of related, but I haven't actually done exactly what you're looking for. And I think if you can either say, hey, this is something I'm kind of familiar with, but maybe haven't learned fully, or give an example of how you learn well. I think so many jobs, it's all about, can you be taught? Can you actually figure out how to do something? If you have a basic understanding of the law, consulting, accounting, what have you, marketing, but you've never specifically done a certain thing, but you can show that you can learn it, there's something to be said about that. And then it also helps you from a growth perspective, thinking of the longevity of your career. I think that you should always look at a job role and say, hey, do I have this experience, but is this also somewhere that I can learn and grow? And I think there's something to be said about, hey, I might not be able to do everything in this role, but I know I could learn it. I know I could figure it out. And especially if you're interviewing with someone who seems like they would be a great teacher, a great mentor, it's a win-win thereof. It's an opportunity that you can get more experience than maybe an MBA. I know we touched on, those grad school programs, but the number of jobs I've had that have essentially been an intensive grad school program where I was actually being paid and not paying some other institution. I am so appreciative to those opportunities.
Well, so we've all been asked this question in a job interview of what are your strengths and weaknesses? How do you answer that? Allie, I think this one's also your question.
Yeah, I think we all know our strengths and weaknesses. And if you don't, ask your mom, because she will tell you. I think that you can spin a weakness as a way for growth, and you say, hey, this is somewhere that I'm always working on, and this is something that I've been really focusing on. And then from a strengths perspective, you say, hey, this is where I thrive. This is where I really shine. I know, again, accounting, it's not necessarily great to broadcast this to the St. Andrews Zoom webinar, but I have been known for not always being super detail oriented. And so I thrive with a great review opportunity of someone either reviewing my stuff or me reviewing someone else's. But I know that, and it's something that I always focus on when I'm executing my job. But at the same time, again, ex-musical theater person doing accounting, I know that some of my strengths when I'm approaching my job might be exceptional to the average accountant that's applying for this job. And so I think if you have a strength that maybe isn't normal for the role that you're applying to, really highlight that, because it makes you a different type of employee, a different type of applicant. And then don't shy away from your weaknesses. I mean, obviously don't emphasize like, hey, I'm late. I struggle waking up in the morning. I'm typically late. I'm sloppy. I mean, don't like emphasize those things, but I think you can use those. I would say maybe emphasize one or two that are places where you're working on growth, because no one is perfect. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and they might have someone on the team already that can compensate for that. Or they know, hey, this person is really awesome, but maybe they are lacking in this skill. We can either add a review for that or have someone else handle it. But I don't think saying my weakness is that I care too much, it's insincere, and everybody knows that that's like a line. Be as authentic as possible without emphasizing like true weaknesses. I mean, like, it's a fine line. And if you have questions, just reach out to me and I'll tell you, because it's hard to find that line. But once you kind of find it, it can be translated across all interviews.
To be honest, but not too honest, is what I hear you saying. Madison, how has the job market changed since you first started working?
Well, since I'm one of the elder statesmen on this call, a lot. I think overall, all for the better. So I think that those of you who are, just beginning your career, it's a good time to do it. For one, like Jace talked about, like exploring and finding people like that. There's just greater ability, like, and transparency to find people and research companies to take advantage of that. The other thing that I think has changed for the better is candidates truly caring and doing a lot of research and contemplation about a firm based on values. And that's exciting, and I think like pushes firms to continue to be better. So I like, if you're in that position of just kind of early years, do that, like not just for your own benefit so that you can find a firm that matches your values, but also because doing that is like pushing companies forward to continue to be better.
And I could follow up a little bit on that as well. And I won't speak necessarily to the job market, but the corporate culture is dramatically different than when I got out of school. And maybe just the culture in general. People are aware of mental health. They are looking out for their employees. People, it's acceptable to take some time to get yourself off, take the mental health day. That was something I never heard of the first 10 years I was working. And so it's a good thing. But along with that, it's important for people that are new to the workforce to understand who the people they're reporting to are, perhaps the generation that you're dealing with, and the expectations that may come along with that. Because I've been in places where, we had boomer managers, and Generation Z comes in and their emails aren't perfectly punctuated, and it's like fire them all, and the idea of, oh, you know what, I had a tough day yesterday, I need a day off. There's a lot of folks of certain generations go, that's great, get your mind right. There's other generations go, oh, that's not wrong, or that's not right, and hopefully that's rapidly changing, but it is something to be aware of when you're in a new place, to understand who you're working for. It goes back to relationships, but I thought that was important to mention, because it's important to know that, and it goes back to company culture too. We all want to be in a place where we're valued and we're valued as people. But it's good to know that going in.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off Mike. I think he hit on a great point about knowing the people that you're working with. I know for my profession, we have, people from recent college or recent law school grads all the way to partners in their 70s who we work with, and clients sometimes who are even older. And knowing how, or being conscious of how different generations work, I think is a really big thing. I know there's a big emphasis in our industry for especially the old guard to understand, like, yeah, the new generation doesn't work quite the way you do, so you need to meet them in the middle, but that's also like a two-way street. Not saying like, everyone needs to be, in the office from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. like they used to back in the 80s or stuff like that in the legal world, but it's something that I think you should always be cognizant of, and it's a way to really make yourself stand out as well. I've discovered, like, I've learned I'm kind of an old soul still, apparently, because I still pick up the phone and call people, and I have associates like, oh, you called me and you didn't just shoot me a message, and I was like, it's just faster. But like, it's a learning process, and you'll start to figure that out with the people that you work with. So there's going to be some hiccups probably, but just as long as you're being very conscious about it, I think you'll be just fine. So
And I would like to add also, LinkedIn is such a useful tool if you're looking for jobs. I know LinkedIn existed when I was graduating from college, but it felt like more of a check the box type exercise of, I have filled out my LinkedIn and now it is ready to go. And now there are all of these tools where you can mark that you're open to applications, or you can find these different connections that you wouldn't have necessarily found outside of it. So don't sleep on LinkedIn, because I have plenty of friends that have found jobs by marking that they're open for opportunity. I am actively getting emails daily from different people saying, hey, come interview here. And granted, again, I'm in a very specific market, so I don't know if that's how it is across the board, but make sure your LinkedIn is up to date and has all of your information, and that alone will help you out in the long run, because it's just a great way to network. It's like the laziest way to do it. It really requires no effort, and you are having people reach out to you.
Micah, in your opinion, has technology helped or hindered the job application process?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question, but I'm really glad Allie talked about LinkedIn, because we've talked a lot about changing jobs or leaving gracefully, or having a good reason to go somewhere else. My company dissolved in 2020, so I was out there looking for something new, and I hadn't spent 6 months sort of kicking the tires and talking to people, and so I started spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, and there's so much there, and there's so much that you can do, but it can be a hindrance because it's overwhelming, and it's hard to decide, to tell the good stuff from the bad stuff, and what's a waste of time and what isn't, because you can waste a lot of time doing that. The thing that I never learned, and maybe one of you guys can speak to, is as people that hire folks more regularly than I do, is how some of those algorithms speak, depending on what you have on those resumes. I'm sure a company like Yeti gets thousands of applications for any job that they want. People want to work there. And those hiring managers have ways to filter through there, and it's a mystery to me. I'll be the first to admit it. What you need to have, what you shouldn't have, those sorts of things. That was a really frustrating part for me. So that was the negative. The technology, and obviously being able to get the background and be there is certainly positive.
Yeah, Micah, I can speak to the number of applications that come in at Yeti. Thankfully, and I know this is shocking to everyone, but the intercompany accounting role that I applied to was not as popular as, say, their entry-level marketing role that maybe had 400, 500 applicants. I think that if you can, because of technology and the ease that, as I mentioned, LinkedIn, you can upload your resume, you can upload all of your information and then just go pop, 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 apply to all of these jobs. I think there is a level of ease that is occurring there, and also a level of laziness in the sense of you're not having to tailor your resumes, you're not having to make these connections beforehand. I think that if there is a company that you are really interested in, utilize LinkedIn, see if there are any alumni from St. Andrews or your college or a sorority fraternity, a club you were in college, a charitable organization that you've been a part of, to make those connections. Because anytime someone has reached out to me about Yeti and we've had a conversation and they seem like an interesting person, it's like, why would I not try and help this person that has actively reached out to someone and shown above and beyond interest in this company? Now, granted, I'm waiting. There's one St. Andrews alum who is just through a second round of interviews that I'm praying gets the job at Yeti, but I am always open to doing that. And I think a lot of people are as well. And then I also think, there's something to be said about, you don't need to send a handwritten thank you note after your interview, but shoot an email, have your template ready that you can insert the name, something specific that happened in the interview that, made you even more excited about this role that exists. Try and find different ways that utilize technology that make you stand out, because at the Yetis, at the Metas, I guess is what it's called now, and at the different really big companies, you are one of thousands at different times applying, and you have to find a way to differentiate yourself, because technology has made it so easy for all these jobs.
Great answer. All right, so this next question is for all four of you, and let's go ahead and answer it in the order of which you introduce yourself. So Micah, you're first, then Madison, then Jace, then Allie. What is one piece of advice that you would give someone regarding their resume?
Well, just like Allie said, you've got to find a way to stand out, because, and there's been a million studies about this, but that the average resume gets looked at for 7 seconds before they move on to the next one, at a lot of places. And so having, something that shows how you're different, better and special is always really important. The other thing, in some of I'm a broadcast journalism major in a past life, and grammatical mistakes are just, it's a deal breaker. There is no there's no dancing around that. And when I see that, even if it's a position, it's a deal killer for a lot of people. It is for me. And so, obviously it's important to show that to several people, to proof it, to understand what you're showing, what you're saying, and so that you can speak to it, but also that somebody else sees it and make sure that you're not, misspelling, that your grammar is right. It's important.
I'm gonna go really, really tactical. Number one, never, ever, ever, ever send it as a Word doc. Save it as a PDF. Save it with your name as the file name. No V20, just like your name, resume, PDF. Never include a cover letter unless it's explicitly asked for. It actually it's hard for it to do you favors, and it can do you harm. So tactical.
All very good points. Nobody likes the cover letter. They're all, that's just a hoop to jump through. That's really just a minefield. Mine's a little more kind of on the go forward basis, but just keep it up to date. You never know when someone's going to ask for one. And something may pop up and you don't want to be scrambling, and that's when you may make a mistake or do something stupid in it. So I go through every 6 months. I'm very happy. I plan on, being a partner at this law firm, in 20 years, or I guess for the next 20 years, I should say. But I still keep my resume and all that stuff up to date, because you just never know when someone's going to need it, or if it's, needed to go to for some marketing purpose or whatnot. So just keep it up to date.
Yeah, and then I'd finally say, similar to what Micah said, make sure the formatting looks good, like all of the columns are aligned. If it doesn't look good, people are more likely to immediately start saying, well, the formatting doesn't look good, let's start looking for other errors. That's also just like an in general advice for every work paper that you're ever working on. Make it look good and people will review it less strenuously. But I think the other thing is, know what industry you're applying to. An accounting resume will look very different than a marketing resume. And a marketing resume will look different than a legal resume. Hopefully you have someone in your life that can kind of guide you towards what is the average accounting, or insert whatever career you're looking at, resume look like. But like, I can tell you, the accounting resume is very boring. We have our legal, like where we went to school, if you're a CPA or not, what jobs you have, and if you can do Excel, which hopefully if you're applying for an accounting job, you have that experience. But like, I have some friends that are in creative industries, and I've looked at their resumes before, and like, you submit this, like, and this is welcomed. So, if you have a question, try and find someone. I mean, again, it's all circled in of like, find a mentor, find someone that works with the company, maybe shoot them your resume and say, hey, is there anything you would do? Like maybe switch, change, whatever. And if you're still in college, utilize the people that are on site that are supposed to help you, because colleges look better if they have a higher like rate of job placement right out of school. So it behooves your university to help you get a job when you graduate. And that resume that you build as a senior in college or junior in college will be the foundation for what you are using the rest of your life. And so make sure it's in great shape when you graduate, and then you can just edit, copy, paste. I'm now at the point where I'm deleting some of the stuff that happened 10 years ago that no longer really applies to my job. But the descriptions that I wrote for PwC as a grad are still what I'm using to this day. So I think that utilize what you have available as well, and make sure that those people are, getting what they should be doing for you.
Okay, one last one for everybody on the panel. What do y'all do in order to sort of keep relevant, to make yourselves more informed, to make better career decisions? What do you do sort of outside of the networking and normal day-to-day professional situations?
Sure. It sounds corny, but it's something that I'm sure the younger people listening are familiar with. It's building a brand, and it's really something that, it's beyond just being an influencer. When you meet people, and you see people from high school, or you're at a ball game or whatever, and you're out there, who you are is and what you project is important, because you never know when that guy you sat next to at a basketball game 6 months ago may be looking for a job, and he may have seen you. You might have been cheering very loudly and obnoxiously and yelling at the refs. And they go, I'm not hiring that guy. And so, and social media, of course, is a minefield. We can talk about that all day too. But one thing that I've focused on is using and I'm a fairly active social media user, is using things, the correct platform for the right, for what I'm doing. My Instagram, my grandmother sees and everyone sees. And so, I'm going to be a little more reserved there and put my best face forward. I'm going to be really work focused and sales focused on LinkedIn, because it's acceptable and that's what people are looking for, in a way that I'm not on my Twitter, where I'm mostly making jokes about basketball. So, it's all about building that personal brand, because a lot of we spend a lot of time talking about resumes, but once you get into your late 20s or your 30s, a lot of how you get a job has nothing to do with your resume. It's about the people that you know and the impression that you've made with them. And it goes back to burning bridges. It's all coming full circle, but now I'm just rambling, but I think that it's important to keep that in mind. And your cell phone it's a loaded gun. I'm sure everybody who's younger knows this by now. But you can do a lot of damage to yourself in 1 minute. And it's important to try and avoid doing that.
I can go next. We're talking about career, not job. Like we've been using that word throughout. And I think some of the defining, like what makes it a career, not a job. One part of it is longevity. But then some of the themes that we've talked about today are, it's highly personal. It's a lot about relationships, and there's a degree of like passion to it. And so kind of one of the things that connects across those things of personal, passion, relationships for me is exploration and conversation, like those two things. And so I think the more that you can like read, listen, like find podcasts that interest you, that are like somewhat in your, and I'm not saying like listen to like, I can't imagine an accounting podcast, but Allie, like kudos if like, but but I'm sure there's some, find some things they can be tangential to even your industry, but things that sort of that light you up, and listen to that and read about that, because then you'll have conversations and reach real connection with people when you talk about it. And it also will help you explore. I think like 10 years ago, I probably would have been I was listening to like a lot of stuff about fashion. Now I'm listening to a lot of stuff about like food industry. So you just never know like where it's going to take you. And so I think that like just personal exploration that you enjoy helps fuel that like personal relationship passion that's actually required for a career that will sustain you for a long time.
Yeah, Madison kind of stole the wind out of my sails now, but yeah, I think it's really comes down to like continuing to find stuff that you're excited about, that even if it's just tangential to your career, like read it, get involved. You never know kind of how things will change. Like when I started out, I pretty much just did small startup work, and now I'm doing large startup work for like clean tech, carbon capture, and private equity, healthcare. And like that's not stuff that I would have necessarily always thought I would do or I'd love to do, but now that's what I spend most of my time like reading about. It's not necessarily stuff that everybody likes, but it's stuff that I've come to enjoy, and it leads to those great conversations with clients or people who are interested in the industry. And that's kind of getting back to what Mike said. At the end of the day, all this stuff is about relationships. That's what makes it into a meaningful career. It's not necessarily just how long you've been at the place, but the impact you're going to be able to leave and the people that you've met and become friends with along the way. As cheesy as that sounds, I guess. But yeah, so I just kind of echo those two.
Yeah, I'll echo further. Shockingly, I'm not listening to accounting podcasts in my free time. I would say accounting is more of what I do, not what I love. Although I do have moments where I love it. But I think that there's something to be said about networking just outside of your industry. Like there's a benefit to being a part of, the Texas CPA organization or, something like that. But like I'm in a book club, and I actually joined the book club after I had joined Yeti, where I then realized there were 2 Yeti employees, a couple girls from St. Andrews, a couple girls I'd gone to camp with, and like all these random people that I actually ended up knowing. And we just liked reading. It was not necessarily a corporate interaction, but we developed these relationships. And now like I see the girls that work at Yeti whenever I go into the office, and we have an outside of work relationship that's really nice. And then I know I can go to them for anything. I also think that workout classes are, I mean, find something like that, whether it's you join a sports league or maybe there's a cooking class that you enjoy, but like I went to a yoga class recently, and I saw some girls with a St. Andrew's bumper sticker on their water bottle, and I was like, I'm going to go over and talk to them. And then of course they were so much younger than me, and it made me feel really old, but I still spoke to them. And I think, piggybacking on that, if you see someone you know or tangentially know, I mean, if they look like they're really involved in the conversation, obviously don't interrupt them, but like most people are open to a, hey, how are you doing? It's great to see you type conversation. And they might just have never thought about you, or didn't realize you were back in Austin, and oh my gosh, I have this perfect role that you would be such a good fit for. So I know there can be a little bit of intimidation of being back in Austin if you've been moved away and moved back, but I think that most St. Andrews alums are open to an approach, and as long as you're approaching it with a sense of respect, I think most people would be open to saying hi.
I just want to echo what Allie said. You don't lose sight of how valuable the St. Andrews network is. Like you really don't know until like you've gotten out, or until you just kind of randomly run into people. And it goes so much farther than you think. It's not just the people that you were in class with. It's like, I'm now doing deals with people's parents that I used to like go to school with. So like the network is way broader than you think. And everybody, you have this common thing that all of us love, and it still means so much to us. So it doesn't matter if, you met them through, the new True Blue network or whatever, or if it's just somebody you happen to run into randomly, that connection is something that, you should go up to that person and talk to them, even if, you haven't seen them in, 10, 15 years, because it's something good will come out of it. I can guarantee that for the most part. Like everyone who went to this place wants to help each other. So don't be afraid to take advantage of that.
Couldn't agree more. Thank y'all. Well, that sort of wraps up all the questions that we have for y'all this evening. And our 4 panelists have agreed to provide some resume peer review for anyone who's interested. So we'll be sending out a link to allow y'all to connect with our panelists. But otherwise, thank you all so much for being here and for offering your insight. And hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Hi, thanks everybody.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.